violence. New reports here, and U.S. embassies on high alert right now. Full court press underway to secure Americans overseas as outrage surrounding this anti-Islam film is growing.
On the hunt for the killers, 4 arrests made in the Libyan consulate attack that killed a U.S. ambassador and 3 staffers.
Also, frayed relations. How should the U.S. answer to all of this violence here playing out on Middle Eastern streets? What is the future of U.S. relations in the Arab world?
And we are covering this developing story for you the way that only CNN can. Ian Lee is live in Cairo. Arwa Damon is live in Benghazi in Libya. We're talking with the former U.S. Ambassador Richard Williamson and CNN's Candy Crowley. It is Friday, September 14th. Starting Point begins right now.
And as we roll into this hour, we have 3 gentlemen sitting here at the table here in the studio in New York, plus you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Berman. We have Bobby Ghosh, editor-at-large at Time Magazine, where he was once the Baghdad bureau chief, who also just told me he was just in Yemen a couple weeks ago inside the U.S. Embassy. So we'll talk to you about what we're seeing there in Yemen today. Also, Ryan Lizza, Washington correspondent, The New Yorker. Welcome, Mr. Lizza.
Hey, thanks.
Jamie Rubin is back, former Assistant Secretary of State, now a counselor to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Gentlemen, good morning.
All 4 gentlemen, thank you very much. Our starting point, this wave of rage, anti-American protests flaring up in more countries overnight. And with Friday prayers ending around the world right now, U.S. embassies around the world are bracing for more.
The anger, the defiance that began Wednesday over this anti-Muslim movie made in the U.S., it is now spreading now to 11 countries. 11. From Egypt as far west as Morocco, as far east as India.
In Egypt, there was mayhem just a few hours ago. Fires, tear gas, rubber bullets. But this new development now, the ruling Muslim Brotherhood is calling for calm and calling off a nationwide protest. But a huge single demonstration is planned for Tahrir Square in Cairo. That will go on.
Also in Yemen this morning, new reports that police are firing warning shots to break up the mob. The mob there yet again, day 2 in the capital city of Sana'a. At least 5 protesters were killed as hundreds of protesters stormed the American embassy there yesterday. You've seen the pictures. They were climbing the walls, setting fires, water cannons now pushing this mob back.
And there has been a major development in Libya. The first arrests in connection with the attack that killed 2 well-respected American diplomats and 2 former Navy SEALs.
Let's begin our live coverage with Ian Lee following the developments in Cairo for us. And Ian, set the scene as we were sort of anticipating some protests after the morning prayers. What's the crowd like?
Well, actually, the crowd in Tahrir Brook is it's getting larger now. It's growing steadily as protesters come from around Cairo and descend on Tahrir Square. We have a few thousand of protesters in Tahrir Square. But if you go away from Tahrir Square about 100 or 200 yards toward the American embassy, you still have the clashes between the police and the protesters. You have the rock throwing, you have tear gas, and something new that we're seeing are water cannons being used. We saw the protesters try to tear down this brick concrete wall that is blocking the street that leads to the embassy. It's about 10, 15 feet high, and we saw protesters trying to tear it down, so far unsuccessfully, as the police tried to repel them away from that wall.
Ian Lee, thank you very much. I hear it behind him. You can hear the crowds there as they continue to grow larger. Ian, we'll check back in with you. Thank you.
There is more news in the region to talk about right now. Libyan authorities announcing the arrest of 4 men in connection with the deadly attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi earlier this week. Our ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, and staffer Sean Smith, among the 4 Americans killed, also killed Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty, both retired Navy SEALs.
Doherty's mother finding it incredibly difficult to come to the grips with losing her son.
Glenn was an amazing human being, and we're devastated. He was a great friend and brother, and really good at his job. And it's a huge loss for everyone.
The voice of a mother, you can just hear the wavering in her voice. Arwa Damon is in Libya. She's on the phone with us now from Benghazi. And Arwa, just what are you learning about everything that's happened the last 2 days?
Well, we actually were just a short while ago at the compound where this attack took place, and it's quite chilling to be standing there imagining just how horrific and terrifying that entire ordeal must have been. The buildings are completely gutted, set ablaze. There's debris all over the place. Some of the walls are splattered with blood. The head of the General National Congress here, Mohammed Maghreb, was touring the facility as we were there as well, and he was telling us that they now believe, the Libyan government now believes, that this was in fact a pre-planned, highly coordinated attack designated to cause maximum damage to the Libyan-American relationships, and that is why it was carried out with such ferocity, of course, ending up with such devastating consequences. They have thus far 4 individuals in custody. Specifically what group they may be affiliated to at this point, that information is not being disclosed. The Libyan government only saying that they do believe that they were affiliated with one of the many extremist groups that are in fact operating in this country. Especially in this part, the eastern part, the city of Benghazi and the areas around it, there are a number of extremist militias with training camps that operate with near impunity. The government acknowledging that at this point in time, given their current capabilities as a government, they are incapable of taking on these extremist elements. But the government now fully aware that it must somehow bring those who carry this out to justice, that it has to somehow impose rule of law, else risk the country disintegrating entirely.
Arwa Damon for us in Benghazi, and I just want to pick up on that point. I was looking at you, Bobby Ghosh, out of the corner of my eye, nodding when she was saying that the government in Libya is incapable of controlling these extremist groups. You write about this in your piece, you know, that the dictators are gone, that these extremists are left unchecked.
Yes, and in the old days, we knew exactly what a Gaddafi or a Mubarak would do in Egypt when protests like this happened. He'd send in his thugs, his security agencies early on, and they'd beat people even to death if necessary and suppress any form of public protest. For one thing, these are democratically elected governments now. They can't do that. They have a responsibility, and they want to be re-elected. Some of the rage is real, and some of the protest has to be allowed to happen. The question is, how do you control that? How do you prevent that from getting out of hand, as it has? The problem there is that these governments are not yet fully in control of all the security apparatus. A lot of the security apparatus was loyal to the former regimes, and the relationships with these new elected governments are still a little fragile. So this is in some ways, this is what the new democracies in the Arab Spring confront. They have weak central authority, poor policing, and they have a populace that now feels free and empowered to protest whenever they feel like it. And more importantly, there are groups within these societies who are taking this anger, cranking it up, and bringing it out into the street in this organized way.
You are seeing Egyptian police and security forces with a stronger presence on the street today. In Yemen, we've seen it over the last 2 days. Is that an encouraging sign, Jamie, to the U.S.?
Yes, I think it is. I think the early response of the Egyptian government was a little questionable. The first response seemed to focus on the film, not the violence and the breaking of the barrier between Egypt and the U.S. compound there. That is Egypt's responsibility, to control the perimeter. In every country in the civilized world, an embassy has a right to expect the host government to protect its perimeter. That didn't happen in Egypt, and in the early hours after the protest began, some of the key officials seemed to be talking about the film, not about their own responsibility to protect the U.S. embassy. And I think perhaps President Obama's phone call has made a difference. The president of Egypt now seems to have moved his focus from the film to Egypt's responsibility. And obviously, in the case of Libya, I think they've done every single thing we could reasonably expect from this fledgling government, from the words that were spoken by the government from the moment this happened to the steps they're now taking to arrest people, to try and track down. You know, this was a very popular ambassador. I think the Libyan government there in Benghazi feels as bad as they could feel for their friend, and ashamed. Yes.